Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a retired Marine builds his dream life off the grid, the last battle he expects is against a power-hungry HOA president. But when sabotage turns to destruction, he rallies his brothers in arms for one final mission: defend his land and bring justice home. It was the kind of late spring morning I used to dream about while on deployment. Sun filtering through the oaks, my dogs trotting the fence line, and the air heavy with honeysuckle and quiet. I'd built this life deliberately, acre by acre, root by root, after retiring from the Corps. 5 acres of North Carolina soil, a restored farmhouse, and a garden full of rare species I'd been collecting and nursing for years. It wasn't paradise to anyone but me, and that's exactly how I liked it. I wasn't technically part of the Pine Hills Preserve HOA, and thank God for that. My property sat just outside the boundary lines, surveyed and deeded long before the HOA ever paved their first sidewalk. My gate was mine. My gravel driveway? Mine. The land? Fully fenced, fully registered, and legally separate. I'd even hired a property attorney when I bought the place to make damn sure I wouldn't be roped into anyone's overreaching suburban fantasy. I'd had enough of rules and uniforms in the service. Out here, it was me, my soil, and my silence. Unfortunately, that silence had a name: Karen Goddard. You could spot her coming by the sound of her shoes, those echoey little clicks like a horse in a hurry, usually followed by the scent of too much citrus perfume and the hum of self-importance. She was the self-elected overlord of all things HOA, president of Pine Hills Preserve for 6 years running, if the smug plaque by her garage was to be believed. Tall, thin, sharp, in the way a cold spoon is sharp. Her type was familiar to me. Not from the battlefield, but from briefings, boardrooms, and bureaucratic nightmares. Aggressive micromanagers convinced their authority extended as far as they could throw a passive-aggressive smile. She first showed up 2 months after I moved in. I was hauling mulch near the garden beds when she appeared on the other side of my gate, like a vulture with a clipboard. "Mr. Hale," she called through the bars, her voice dripping with condescension like syrup left too long in the sun. "We've been meaning to reach out." I wiped sweat from my brow and kept stacking. "Not part of the HOA," I said simply. Her smile tightened. "Yes, well, that's something we really should discuss. It would be beneficial for everyone if you considered becoming a contributing member. Beautification fees, common road maintenance, neighborhood cohesion." I looked at her. "I maintain my road, my own. I'm not in your jurisdiction." "Got the documents to prove it." "We like to think of Pine Hills as a community," she pressed, undeterred, "not a patchwork of loners." I smiled, just enough to be polite. "I like patchwork." She left with a little huff, and I didn't see her again for 3 weeks. That's when the letters started. They weren't formal notices, just envelopes slipped into my mailbox with no postage and a whiff of cheap perfume. "Your yard may be out of sync with the visual identity of Pine Hills Preserve," or "It's customary for residents to remove non-native flora." One of them had a printed brochure for approved paint colors. I used it to line the bottom of my compost bin. Then came the incidents. The first time it happened, I chalked it up to coincidence. I'd come home from the feed store and found the east fence open, one of my dogs trailing mud across the porch like she'd run half the yard unsupervised. 2 of my smaller citrus trees had been bent unnaturally low, like someone had stepped right over them. I checked the security footage. Nothing. Camera had cut out for 3 hours in the afternoon. Surge, maybe, or sabotage. Next week, someone accidentally mowed the edge of my wildflower bed that bordered the HOA property. Flowers I'd been cultivating from seed. I found bright green grass clippings dumped over my rare orchids, as if someone had helpfully cleaned up. Then came the fertilizer incident. I let my dogs out early one morning and heard one of them yelp. I found Scout pawing at his eyes near a suspicious patch of burned grass. The vet said someone had dumped concentrated nitrogen pellets, way more than any sane person would use on a lawn. Scout recovered, but I didn't forget. I'd dealt with sabotage before, just not the HOA kind. After that, I started sleeping lighter. I cleaned the lenses on my cameras and upgraded the motion sensors. I walked the perimeter every night with a flashlight and a sidearm, not because I was afraid, but because I knew patterns. And this one was escalating. Then came the note. Left in my mailbox with no return address. "You're not welcome here. Sell or shut up." Now I'd been shot at by professionals, interrogated by tribal elders, and once had to defuse a screaming match between two Afghan village leaders while a goat chewed through our satellite cable. But this was some middle-class war game I never asked to play. Still, I figured maybe it would die down. Maybe Karen would find a new obsession. A neighbor with solar panels installed without permission, perhaps. Or a mailbox 1 shade too turquoise. I needed a break. Something to clear my head. So when my old recon buddies suggested a long overdue road trip to a veterans convention 2 states over, I said yes without hesitation. 3 days away. Good food, better stories, and the kind of people who understood boundaries because they'd crossed too many of them under fire. I packed up, double-checked the cameras, left enough kibble and timers for the dogs, and hit the road. As I drove out of Pine Hills that Friday morning, I passed Karen's house. She was standing at her window, coffee in hand, watching my truck roll by. I didn't wave. I just smiled. She had no idea what kind of war she'd just started. When I pulled up to the front gate late Monday afternoon, something felt off before I even saw the damage. Scout and Belle weren't barking. Normally, they'd be raising hell the second my tires hit the gravel. Instead, I was met with silence. Thick and wrong. The kind of silence that wraps around your ribs like a slow, cold hand. Then I saw it. The gate was open. Not broken, not smashed. Unlocked. The heavy chain I'd padlocked before leaving was hanging loose. The latch swinging in the breeze like someone had left it open on their way out. That chain had a military-grade master lock on it. Either someone had the key, or they'd planned around it. My boots crunched the gravel as I stepped out of the truck. The closer I walked, the slower I moved. What used to be the front garden, my Japanese maples, the hand-built stone path, the low lavender bushes, was now a swath of raw, churned-up earth. A deep gouge in the land ran from the entry gate all the way toward the greenhouse, as if someone had dragged a plow through it in a rage. Or an excavator. There were tread marks. Deep ones. Maybe from a mid-size bobcat. Maybe heavier. I dropped my duffel and jogged toward the greenhouse, or what was left of it. The frame was collapsed inward, one side crushed like a beer can. My irrigation tank had been punctured, the drip lines ripped from the soil like veins from flesh. Inside, rare seedlings lay upended, drying in the open air. I stood there a minute, staring, and then came the real gut punch. My orchard. Saplings, black walnut, pawpaw, serviceberry, torn from the ground. Some snapped in half, others just missing. Probably scooped up by whatever heavy equipment had danced through the place like it was a sandbox. My garden of salvias and native milkweed was buried under piles of displaced clay. My perimeter fence, reinforced post by post, had been cut in 3 separate places, as if someone was making it easier to get in and out with machinery. They hadn't just vandalized my land, they'd waged surgical war on it. I felt that old cold calm settle in. The one that used to hit right before a night raid or after hearing, "We're taking fire." I breathed through it, slowly, deeply, until I could think clearly. I reached into my pack, grabbed my small drone case, and powered it up. Then I walked the yard, slowly, silently, snapping photos, taking samples, noting tracks and broken fence posts. It was evidence. All of it. When I returned to the house, I found Scout curled up under the porch, clearly shaken but unharmed. Belle barked once from the backside of the property. Someone had left a sack of old fertilizer right by her pen. A message, or just laziness. Either way, it wasn't a coincidence. Inside my mailbox sat a white envelope. No postage, no name. Just the HOA letterhead stamped dead center, like a threat sealed in smugness. I opened it. Improvements to drainage in accordance with Pine Hills Preserve Beautification Initiative. We attempted to inform you. Please ensure your property is not interfering with neighborhood-wide upgrades. No name, no contact, no apology. Just a claim to legitimacy, scribbled in sanitized bureaucratese. I wasn't surprised. I was furious. They thought I was gone long enough to do what they wanted and slip out before I returned. They assumed I'd roll over, that I'd get mad, maybe yell, then pay for repairs out of my own pocket just to make it go away. What they didn't know was that I hadn't come back alone. 15 minutes later, 2 trucks rolled up my driveway, one with Texas plates, the other Virginia. Jackson stepped out first, still built like a brick wall, and moving like he was ready for a firefight. Behind him, Torres and Boone followed, laughing about something I didn't catch, but ready for war the second they saw my face. The laughter stopped when they saw the yard. Jackson knelt by the gouged-up turf and ran a gloved hand over the exposed roots. "Jesus," he muttered, "they hit you hard." "Real hard," I said, "and they thought I wouldn't come back until tomorrow." Boone was already checking the perimeter. "Who the hell did this? Looks like they were laying trench lines." HOA, or someone they hired. Torres was already firing up the second drone, scanning the property. He had a modified model with infrared and night vision capabilities. "We'll get eyes on tonight. Set up perimeter cams, trigger sensors. If they come back to finish the job, we'll know." Jackson nodded. "They trespassed." I pointed to the damaged fencing, the broken locks, the tracks clearly showing heavy machinery crossed private boundary lines. "And I've got the deed, the survey, the property lines, all documented and filed with the county." We set to work. Within the hour, we had trail cams mounted, motion lights reinstalled, and the drone feeding live footage to my laptop. Torres calibrated a time-stamped overlay just in case we needed to show a judge. That night, I barely slept, not because I was afraid, but because my mind was already building the response plan. Boone was cataloging every plant species lost. Jackson was working up a cost estimate for soil rehabilitation. Torres was sorting footage. The damage wasn't just cosmetic. It was calculated. The next morning, we got a lead. Torres had reviewed the drone log from Friday night. Around 2 hours, the footage caught 2 men in reflective vests entering through the back fence, where a section had been cut clean through. They used bolt cutters. One held a folder. The other placed red flag markers every 10 feet along the garden, stopping to take photos on a tablet. Boone slowed the footage, zoomed in. The vest said Green Line Landscaping. I pulled up their website. Their listed address? The same as a contractor's office owned by Karen's brother-in-law. We had them. Not just on trespass, not just on property destruction. We had collusion, conflict of interest, and premeditated fraud. It was time to bring in our own weapons, documents, lawyers, footage, witnesses. But first, we waited. Because these people, they weren't done yet. It started with a rumble. Not thunder. Too steady. Not a car. Too heavy. The kind of low mechanical growl you feel in your molars before your brain has time to process it. I was in the kitchen drinking stale coffee and reviewing our overnight drone footage when bells started barking like the world was ending. Scout followed, charging toward the southern fence line. I dropped the mug and was out the door in under 10 seconds. That's when I saw the truck. A flatbed, hauling a mid-sized backhoe, inching its way through the gap in the southern fence. The exact breach we hadn't sealed yet. Behind it came another vehicle, some white contractor van with an HOA logo slapped on the side like a cheap sticker. 3 men in reflective vests stood near the path, one holding a clipboard, the others gesturing toward the garden like they had every right in the world to be there. I didn't yell, I didn't run, I walked, fast, focused, straight through the churned mud and splintered orchard toward the biggest guy in the group. Jackson and Torres emerged behind me without a word. Boone was still up at the house, prepping the body cam footage for live stream, just in case this turned into another police report. The man with the clipboard looked up as I approached. "You the homeowner?" he asked, already turning away like I wasn't worth his time. "You're on private property," I said, my voice flat as steel. "Who gave you permission to be here?" "HOA authorization," he said, waving the clipboard like a badge. "Drainage continuation, phase 2. Didn't your president tell you?" "I'm not in the HOA," I replied. "Well, we've got standing orders from Ms. Goddard. We're finishing what we started. Equipment's rented. We're billing the association, not you, so no need to panic." He turned toward the machinery and waved the operator forward. The backhoe's engine roared louder as it rolled over my crushed flower beds like they were speed bumps. That's when Torres stepped in front of it, hand raised, calm, military precise. The operator hesitated. Jackson circled around to the rear, locked the gate, and pulled the chain across it. Boone's voice crackled in our earbuds. "Stream is live. Cam 1, 2, and 4 rolling. Police dispatch ready on standby." The guy with the clipboard must have realized something was off. He took a step toward Torres. "You touch my men, and we'll have you arrested," he snapped. Torres didn't even blink. "Your men are trespassing. We've got authorization." I pulled out my phone. "Then show me the court order or signed permit. Because otherwise, what you're doing is criminal trespass, destruction of private property, and, if that machine takes one more foot forward, felony vandalism." That's when one of the other workers, a wiry guy in his 40s with more tattoos than Common Sense stepped forward holding a freaking steel digging bar, like he thought he was about to start a fight on a construction site. He swung it up once. Maybe a threat. Maybe muscle memory. Wrong move. In under 3 seconds, Jackson had closed the distance, stripped the bar from his grip, and had him on the ground face first with his hand zip-tied behind his back. No violence, just physics and years of training. The rest of the crew backed up fast. "I think we're done here," I said, pointing to the gate. "Pack your gear. You're not stepping 1 inch further." Torres approached the van, scanning the logo. "Green line again," he said. "No signage, no visible license number. You want to bet this vehicle's registered to a shell company?" The clipboard guy was red now, sweating bullets. "I'm calling the HOA." "You do that," I said. "And tell Karen she just sent her contractors to commit a felony. On camera." That's when the siren started. Sheriff's deputy rolled up, lights flashing, tires kicking up dirt. Officer McNeil stepped out, young, square-jawed, and local. I knew his father from the VFW hall. He surveyed the scene. 1 man zip-tied and quietly cussing, 3 other contractors frozen, a locked gate, and me, standing with a camo jacket and a folder in hand. I stepped forward first. "Afternoon, deputy. Got trespassers here. No permit, no sign permission, entry through a cut fence. Equipment already damaged my greenhouse and orchard last week. This is the 2nd incursion. We've got drone footage, body cam angles, audio, and drone tracking of prior illegal entry points." McNeil nodded slowly. "Y'all boys work for Ms. Goddard?" Clipboard guy looked like he'd swallowed a nail. We were hired through the HOA, yeah, drainage project." McNeil looked at me. "And your property's not part of their district?" "Confirmed," I said, handing over the property deed, parcel maps, and the HOA's recorded boundary documents from the county clerk. "All notarized. Want to see the footage from the drone, too?" He glanced at Jackson and Torres. "You guys keeping it professional?" Torres lifted his hands. "Zero contact except for disarming this guy. He was about to swing a digging bar." McNeil sighed. "All right, give me a minute." He radioed it in. 20 minutes later, another cruiser showed up, along with one of the county zoning officers. Boone escorted him around the damaged areas, explaining the prior incidents and pointing out the remains of marker flags placed during the unauthorized planning. Meanwhile, the workers tried to play dumb. "We were just told to finish the job. Didn't know it was off limits." She said it was okay. She, in this case, being Karen Goddard. Officer McNeil came back after a private phone call. "All right, Mr. Hale, here's where we stand. No record of county approval, no work order on file. The fence line matches your parcel lines. You're not part of Pine Hills Preserve jurisdiction." They had no legal authority to send contractors here. "Are they being charged?" "I've got to bring one of them in for the attempted assault with the tool. The rest we'll document and release pending investigation. But I suggest you file a civil claim as well. They've caused a lot of damage." "Oh," I said. "That's already in motion." Just then, another car pulled up. Sleek, expensive. Driver's side window rolled down before the engine even cut off. Karen. She stepped out wearing a sun hat like she was arriving for brunch. The deputy walked over to intercept her. "I'm here to clarify this misunderstanding," she said loudly enough for the whole yard to hear. "I'm the HOA president, and I authorized this work. Mr. Hale is misrepresenting his property's status." "No, ma'am," McNeil cut in. "That's already been verified. He's not in your association. This was unauthorized. You'll need to contact your legal counsel." Her face went rigid. "We're trying to improve community infrastructure." I took a step forward. "You destroyed private land twice. You're going to court. The only thing you've improved is my legal team's morale." Karen's eyes flicked to the cameras, the deputies, the contractors now packing up under orders, and the neighbor across the street filming everything on their phone. She looked like she wanted to scream but was too proud to break in public. So she turned, silent, and got back in her car. It didn't matter. The line had been crossed, and we had it all on record. By Tuesday morning, the calm was almost eerie. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from peace, but from pressure building under the surface. Like the air before a hurricane, my phone was already ringing by 7. First the sheriff's office calling to confirm they were filing the assault charge. Then the zoning board, off the record, admitting they'd never seen a permit from the HOA for any of the drainage improvements. Torres had spent the night reviewing drone footage from the past 2 weeks, slowing the night entries frame by frame. Around 2 in the morning last Friday, 3 figures in reflective vests had slipped through the fence's south cut. They planted red flags, sprayed fluorescent markers, and dropped laminated signs staked into the dirt. Ditch line Phase 2. No headlights, no vehicle plates visible. And then we saw it. One of them pulled out a clipboard. Torres zoomed in. A logo, Pine Hills Preserve HOA. Below it, a printed document with a name scrawled across the bottom. The signature was unmistakably mine, only I'd never signed a damn thing. Jackson and Boone were already in the dining room, sorting papers. Boone had a detailed damage report. Greenhouse infrastructure, irrigation system, trees, plant stock, fencing, soil degradation, valued at over $85,000. Jackson had his old contacts at the state bar check into Greenline Landscaping, the company name we kept seeing on the vests. Turns out it was registered to an LLC owned by Karen's sister's husband, Robert Sanderson. We were dealing with fraud, conflict of interest, unlicensed contracting, and felony trespass, all under the HOA's name. That same afternoon, I drove straight to the county recorder's office, Torres riding shotgun with the drone files. We requested every permit filed in the last 90 days by the HOA or Karen Goddard. After 30 minutes and a lot of tapping on keyboards, the clerk brought out a printed permit application for Community Drainage Phase 2, dated 10 days ago. It included a digital consent form from the adjoining property owner, me. It had my full name, my parcel number, my electronic signature. Only problem, I don't sign anything digital without a secure email and dual auth confirmation. I don't even use DocuSign. And the email listed in the metadata? Not mine. That was all we needed. I called Jeremy. Jeremy Knoll wasn't just my friend. He was a former JAG attorney with experience in military property claims, civilian litigation, and federal fraud investigations. He'd helped prosecute contractors for forging supply records in Iraq. This was personal. He drove up from Raleigh that night, briefcase in hand, caffeine in his veins, and the expression of a man who'd just been handed an open and shut lawsuit on a silver platter. This, he said, flipping through the files, is a slam dunk. By midnight, we had a cease and desist letter ready to go, a civil claim drafted for damages of $250,000, and an outline for criminal referrals to the county DA for fraud, falsification of legal documents, trespass, and contracting violations. We'd also included the Contractors Licensing Board and the State Attorney General's Consumer Fraud Division, just to make sure no stone went unturned. The next morning, I delivered the cease and desist in person to the HOA office. It wasn't much of an office, just a rented room in a shared strip mall space between a vape shop and a dry cleaner. But the moment I walked in with Torres and Jackson behind me, the receptionist stiffened like we were walking in with subpoenas. I handed her the envelope. "This is for Ms. Goddard." "And you are?" she asked. "Lucas Hale, the guy whose land your organization just tried to destroy with a forged signature." She blinked. I don't think she's in today." "She will be soon," Torres muttered, too quiet for her to catch. Back home, Boone had been busy. Turns out one of Karen's contractors, the guy who swung the digging bar, had a rap sheet, not just a DUI or unpaid tickets. A prior conviction for fraudulent contracting without a license, back in Georgia. We added it to the packet. That evening, Jeremy filed everything officially. We served both Karen and the HOA at their listed addresses. My neighbor across the street, a retired court clerk named Louise, offered to witness the delivery for court purposes. She'd been keeping to herself ever since the HOA was formed, but after watching Karen's parade of nonsense for years, she was more than happy to lend support. "You know," she said as we watched the envelope get placed firmly in Karen's mailbox, "I always thought that woman needed someone to tell her no for once." "That's what we're doing now," I said, "legally and permanently." I didn't celebrate. Not yet. There was too much to do. But as I looked out over my battered land, I started to feel the ground shift, not from bulldozers, but from leverage. They came at me with backhoes and paperwork. Now we were coming back with facts, filings, and firepower of our own. And this time, I wasn't just protecting my land. I was going to burn their paper fortress down from the inside, one legal page at a time. By the end of that week, our case had momentum, and Karen's little empire was beginning to show cracks. Word had started spreading through the neighborhood, not because I said anything, but because people talk, especially when contractors are detained by police and drones hover above property lines like hawks on a hunt. The first break came from a place I didn't expect. Martha Liddell, a retired school teacher who lived 3 houses down from Karen and, rumor had it, used to be her friend. She stopped me one morning while I was walking the perimeter with Scout. "Mr. Hale," she called out, voice shaking just a little. "You don't know me, but I think you ought to see something." She invited me in for tea, like we were about to discuss a bake sale. Instead, she brought out a stack of HOA newsletters, invoices, and meeting notes. Apparently, she'd served on the HOA Finance Subcommittee before resigning last month. "I didn't want to be part of something shady," she said, tapping the papers. "But I didn't know how shady it really was until you stood up to her." What she showed me was damning. Over $80,000 spent in the last 2 fiscal years on groundskeeping and drainage consulting, all paid to Greenline Services, LLC. She hadn't connected the dots until she saw my footage and recognized one of the workers as Robert Sanderson, Karen's sister's husband. Nepotism, kickbacks, fraud. I asked her if she'd be willing to go on record. She nodded. 2 days later, a local journalist from the county paper, Mark Dale, reached out. He'd seen my name on a court filing and wanted to know why a decorated veteran was suing a suburban HOA for $250,000. I invited him over. He expected some bitter retiree with a grudge. What he got was a guided tour of destroyed orchards, crushed irrigation systems, drone footage of midnight trespassers, and a polite but deadly serious explanation of what Karen Goddard had orchestrated. Mark's article dropped on Sunday. Pine Hills HOA or personal playground. How one homeowner fought back against rogue leadership. It hit hard. He included financial records, legal filings, and an anonymous quote from Martha. The HOA was supposed to protect property values, not destroy property outright. Neighbors began knocking on my door, some to apologize, others to vent. One man, a father of 3, told me he'd been fined $500 for painting his mailbox the wrong shade of beige. Another had been told to remove solar panels to preserve aesthetic uniformity, even though they were legal under state law. Turns out, I wasn't the only one angry. I was just the first to push back. The next HOA meeting was packed. Normally a sleepy affair in the community center, it looked more like a town hall on fire. Folding chairs filled. People stood against the walls. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. Mark Dale was there with a recorder. Martha stood up and read her resignation letter aloud. Then someone asked the question, where exactly is all this money going? Karen, sitting at the head table in her usual beige blazer and pearl earrings, tried to keep control. She rattled off terms like capital improvements and multi-phase development, but her voice trembled. She wasn't used to challenge. And then a man from the back shouted, "You told us this was approved by the county." I called. "They've never seen the plans." That was the moment the room turned. Demands were made for an independent audit. A motion was raised to suspend Karen as acting president pending investigation. It passed by majority vote, on record. Karen didn't say a word as she stood up and left the room, but I did notice her glance toward me. Sharp, hateful, not beaten, not yet, but shaken. That night, Jeremy filed the criminal complaint. Fraud, trespass, document falsification, and conspiracy to commit vandalism. Karen wanted a war. Now she had one. Court was set for mid-October, and by then Karen's entire facade was held together by masking tape and denial. Her allies on the HOA board began distancing themselves like rats abandoning a ship with holes you could drive a truck through. 2 quietly resigned. One flipped completely and began cooperating with the investigation after being shown the drone footage and financial records. Jeremy had built our case like a siege engineer, layer by layer, evidence stacked with the precision of someone who'd once prosecuted wartime contracting crimes. We weren't just coming after her for trespass and property damage. We were coming for everything. The forged signature, the unauthorized use of HOA funds, the hiring of a known unlicensed felon, the false permit application to the county, and the physical invasion of private property. And it worked. The grand jury returned an indictment. Karen was arrested on 4 counts of felony fraud, 1 count of criminal conspiracy, and multiple counts of trespassing and falsification of legal documents. The image of her being led out of her home in cuffs made the local evening news, and the HOA Facebook group melted down like a block of butter in July. Of course, she posted bail. Of course, she claimed it was all a misunderstanding fueled by malicious actors, but at that point, no one was buying it. The civil trial started 2 weeks later. Karen had retained a defense attorney who looked like he belonged in a toothpaste commercial and spoke like he was auditioning for courtroom television. He argued that the HOA had acted in good faith, that the signature dispute was a clerical error, and that Mr. Hale's injuries were exaggerated. Then we showed the footage, the night entry with bolt cutters, the machinery rolling across my flower beds, the signed permit application using an email address that didn't exist, the contractor's criminal history, the payment records linking HOA funds directly to Greenline LLC. The courtroom went so quiet, you could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing. Jeremy presented a full economic damages report. It included the cost of replacing the greenhouse, replanting the orchard, repairing the fencing, rehabilitating the soil, plus pain and suffering, and legal fees. The final number, $264,000. The judge didn't take long. Within 2 weeks, the verdict came back in our favor. Full damages awarded. Karen was personally liable for over half of the judgment. The rest was to be paid by the HOA's insurance, which triggered a special assessment on all members, igniting another firestorm within the community. Karen's personal accounts were frozen. Her property seized pending repayment. Her reputation obliterated. But the real fallout came at the emergency HOA assembly. The residents voted to dissolve the existing HOA board. The bylaws were amended, legal counsel brought in, and for the first time since its inception, Pine Hills Preserve, HOA, was placed under external audit and restructuring. I didn't attend that meeting. I was home, in my rebuilt greenhouse, transplanting a new batch of seedlings into fresh, living soil. Scout dozed in the shade, and the fences were reinforced and gleaming. I wasn't interested in revenge. I'd gotten something better, justice. 6 months later, spring returned to Pine Hills, the kind that rolls in soft and warm, heavy with pollen and second chances. My land had scars, sure, but so did I. We'd both healed more than most expected. The greenhouse was fully rebuilt, stronger this time, with reinforced panels and a smart irrigation system powered by solar. Jackson helped install it on his last visit, muttering about civilian luxuries and how tomatoes should not require more tech than a military drone. The orchard was growing again, young saplings lined in neat rows, their roots firm in soil we'd amended ourselves bucket by bucket. We planted 1 tree for every day I'd spent away during the investigation. 7 of them. The 8th? That one was for Scout. He'd been my shadow through it all, and he deserved his own patch of shade. The HOA, gone as it once was. The board had been dissolved by overwhelming vote. The new committee was smaller, transparent, and, most importantly, understood exactly where my property began and ended. No more newsletters in my mailbox. No more beautification notices. Just respectful silence. Karen? Her sentencing came and went. 18 months probation, a permanent ban from holding HOA office, and financial ruin. Her house went on the market under court order, sold to a young couple who, on their first day, brought over banana bread and a handwritten card that said, "We heard the stories, we're not like that. Thank you for standing up." I told them they were welcome anytime, for coffee, for questions, or for the annual BBQ. That's right, the BBQ was back. What started as a backyard cookout among old Marines turned into a yearly gathering. Veterans, neighbors, friends, a few curious locals, everyone came. Even Mark Dale, the reporter, showed up with his teenage son and a 6-pack of something too fancy for me to pronounce. Torres handled the grill like it was a tactical op. Boone made jokes so bad they somehow got funnier with repetition. Jackson brought ribs, justice, and a folding chair that could survive a hurricane. And above the gate, rebuilt with iron, not aluminum, hung a new sign, "Private Property. Trespass at your own risk." Marines still watching. People laughed when they saw it, but they also read it twice. That was the point.